Thanks for joining us for tonight's offshore wind comment writing workshop. Joining tonight, three awesome, amazing organizations: Rogue Climate, Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition, and Crag Law Center. We'll be here to share some awesome info about the current comment period, as well as just give updates about what is going on. Next slide, please. And just to do a little brief introduction, here's some of the names and faces that are supporting tonight's workshop. Definitely want to give some kudos to Jess and Abby from the Road Climate staff. They're going to be our tech support tonight. So if you folks have any Zoom issues, those are the people to get in contact with. Also have Annie from Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition, and Eric and Kelly from Crag Law Center. So we got a dynamic duo. And oh yeah, I'm Ashley. So glad to see you all here. And we'll hear more about our specific organizations in a bit later. So let's move ahead to some tech tips though while you're here. If you we are going to ask folks to stay muted for during the presentations. We will have a section of Q&A, so there'll be a perfect opportunity if folks want to share any verbal questions, or we're going to also ask folks to put those into the chat. Put your questions into the chat throughout the session so that we can help organize those. If you haven't yet, you can turn on and off your video so we can see your beautiful shining faces here. And if you on the right hand side of that awesome toolbar here in Zoom, you can do some reactions. And so let's go to the next slide here. And one way to view tonight's presentation is to use on the top of your screen. You can do a side-by-side mode, so then you can see facilitators and everybody else, as well as the screen at the same time. Next slide, please. All right. So thank you for being here tonight. We're excited to have a robust comment writing tonight, and glad to be here. I'm calling from Coos Bay with you all, which are the traditional homelands of the Hannes Coos and Mylute Coos peoples, and the restored tribes of the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, Siuslaw Indians, the Coquel Indian tribe, and the Confederated Tribe of the Silex. Abby here has dropped in a link for an awesome app called Native Land, and we encourage folks to use that link and to let us know whose lands that you're calling from tonight. And if I didn't say it earlier too, if folks need to, again, get tech support, Abby and Jess, who have awesomely renamed their names to include tech support on there, those are the folks to get in contact with. And as we're navigating the presentation here, just feel free to use that link there and to share whose lands that you're calling from. Let's check out the next slide here. This is a brief outline for today's flow. So we're going to introduce our organizations more in just a moment, share some community agreements for a productive session, review information on floating offshore wind, just to make sure folks have a shared understanding of what we're talking about. And then we'll dive into today's comment period that we're specifically looking at the state of Oregon's federal consistency review. After that, we'll review some tips for writing effective comments, and then have an opportunity for Q&A. And with the remaining time, have an opportunity for breakout groups for some comment writing. Woohoo! Our goal is to finish up by 7:30. We'll close out next steps. So if folks have questions along the way, Feel free to type those into the chat box, and we'll do our best to address those. So now let's learn who's presenting here tonight. Next slide, please. Road Climate, pictured here is we're a climate justice group that's based in Southern Oregon. Our mission is to empower Southern Oregon communities that are most impacted by climate change, including low income, rural, youth, seniors, communities of color, to win climate justice by organizing for clean energy, sustainable jobs, and a healthy environment. We do so through leadership development, political education, fostering conversation, campaigns, and for policies that benefit our communities over the special interests of the largest corporations. We also have an office here in downtown Coos Bay. And so, yes, we appreciate being on the coast and supporting coastal communities. I'll pass it over to Annie next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie. I'm joining remotely from the traditional homelands of the Cayuse, Klamath, and Walla Walla. And I'm the Ocean and Estuaries Manager at Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. We are a conservation nonprofit whose mission is to engage, educate, and empower people to protect and increase the resilience of the coast ecosystems, landscapes, and communities. And we do this by engaging and tracking public policy processes and educating and empowering the public to take action. So we're really pleased to be here today to help out with the comment writing workshop. And we also could not do what we do without our partnership with the Cragg Law Center through our Coastal Law Project. And the Coastal Law Project enables us to participate effectively in formal hearings in court and in public comment processes, such as this current floating offshore wind process. And our attorneys at Cragg provide legal resources and support to help us understand really complex regulatory problems and land use issues, among many, many other things. So next, I'll kick it over to Cragg Law Center for their introduction.
Thanks, Annie. Hi, everyone. Eric Briston, he, him. I'm the Coastal Law Project attorney at Cragg Law Center, and I'm calling in from the lands of the Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Cayuse. I'm also here with Kelly Chang, who is our incredible legal fellow. Annie gave a really great overview of what the Coastal Law Project is, but just to kind of touch a little more broadly on Cragg's work, we're a nonprofit environmental law center that works across the Pacific Northwest, providing free and low-cost legal services to community organizations, fighting for the environment and for communities. Our work is broken up broadly into 3 project areas, covering the wild, climate, and communities.
Awesome. We'll go to the next slide, please. And before jumping into some community agreements, just want to do a little bit of grounding, which I hope can help set the stage for the next parts of this presentation. Is that at this moment, our organizations are not advocating for or against offshore wind development. We understand floating offshore wind has the potential to meet energy needs in Oregon, but we do not know what the impacts of this relatively new type of offshore wind technology are. We do not want similar harms that have been done by the fossil fuel industry to be replicated on tribal and South Coast communities, as well as our ecosystems and existing industries. Our organizations have been focusing on advocating for community priorities and accessibility within these long decision-making processes. This leads to the intention of tonight's session, which is to help provide a space for community members to learn more about the state of Oregon's first comment period pertaining to potential offshore wind development. And our goal is to inform the public about opportunities to share their opinions, priorities, and more with decision-making agencies. So we'll go to the next slide here. before jumping in, I like to do into more content. We like to do community agreements just to help create a atmosphere for good vibes, I should say. I like to say agreements because I know if I was to say the rules that I know a handful of people that like to break the rules. So not going to say all these here, but just uplift a couple of them is that especially just taking a look of who's coming in so far tonight. I know many of us have different experiences and knowledge of offshore wind. So alone we know a little and together we know a lot. And of course, be respectful. That's our ultimate goal tonight is to have a respectful area and engage at your own pace, especially as we dive into certain areas that might be more technical, or I like to say wonky compared to others. Feel free to dive in as much as you can. And if you need a moment to step away, feel free to do so, or even let us know if you need some extra help or support. So, and then also, I guess just want to end this with disagreement does not necessarily mean conflict because a lot of us are coming into this space with, again, different views and experiences. I just want to take a moment to see if there's anything else that folks may want to add or uplift for a community agreement. If you do, feel free to submit those into the chat at this time. And then before moving ahead, I know that there is like a lot of opinions when it comes to floating offshore wind energy, and really want to support folks and encourage them to reserve those opinions or their comments and to really focus on learning more during this session today. So if folks are not being respectful, we may ask you to chill out, take a break, and we do reserve the right to remove anybody from the session if respect is not given and mutual. So just want to be clear because we know people are really passionate about this issue and their stances, and we're just here to help guide an opportunity to share those different opportunities to share their opinions with within the next steps of these process. So I guess I'm not seeing anything coming into the chat. So let's dive into offshore wind. Woohoo. So what is floating offshore wind? It is a relatively new renewable energy technology that places floating turbines off the coast in deep water. This technology is being proposed off of Oregon's south coast because of the depths of our ocean floors. Floating turbines are attached to the deep ocean floor by cables. Energy generated by the cables would be transported to shore by cables underwater and then connected to the broader electric grid. So let's check out the next slide here. And I know some folks may have seen this in other presentations before, but just to share some visuals, this is some potential types of technology that may be proposed in the future. The three on the right here, the tension leg platform, semi-submersible, and spar are a few of the different examples that could be proposed. We, at this current moment, the way how the process is, the specific types of technology like this are not known at this time in terms of decision-making processes. On the left-hand side, the monopile and jacket, those are a couple examples of stationary turbines that have been more proposed for projects, especially like on the East Coast, where there's more shallow waters compared to here. Let's check out the next slide. And just what I was just describing earlier, this is one example of the type of systems that may be proposed to connect the wind turbines to various substations offshore and onshore, and eventually lead to people's homes and businesses as proposed. So why the South Coast of Oregon? So the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is really the key agency at this moment that's overseeing the leasing process of exploring floating offshore wind development off of Oregon South Coast. Because if we take a look here at this map, it helps showcase where some of the strongest and most consistent winds are. Basically, darker the color, more stronger the wind speeds are. And if you were to zoom in on there, between Northern California and Southern Oregon coast, that's where we see some of the fastest consistent wind speeds outlined there. Yeah, and then I'm going to pass it off to Annie for this next part.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, I just wanted to pop in and explain sort of where we're at in terms of the ecology. This exceptional wind patterns on the West Coast actually drive the entire ecosystem and are responsible for the biodiversity and productivity of our marine environment that we all love and enjoy. So the California current ecosystem is a dynamic and interconnected ecoregion that's characterized by the California current, which runs south from BC, Canada to Baja, Mexico along the coast. And then in the system, seasonal patterns of wind-driven upwelling of nutrients from the deep ocean. It's upwelled to the surface, which fuels phytoplankton blooms and forms the base of our marine food web. And it's because of this phenomenon, again, that's driven by wind, that our coast is home to a diversity of fish, birds, marine mammals, many of which are migratory along the whole coast. And these species and oceanographic processes are also, no arbitrary borders in the ocean. So scientists like to consider this entire system as one interconnected ecosystem. And the CCE also supports some of the most productive fisheries in the world, and approximately 100,000 jobs in the seafood industry are supported by this ecosystem. So yeah, that's just the grounding on why this ecosystem is important, and equally important to consider in the context of marine renewable energy. Next slide, please. Okay, and then so where we're at so far in the process, the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has identified 2 call areas off the south coast based on these expected wind conditions. And these areas were narrowed down to the official wind energy areas, or WEAs, as people like to shorthand, after receiving input on competing uses, sensitive habitats, and protected species that utilize the call areas. So they've been narrowed down to these dark colors within the overall outline colors, which were the original proposed call areas. And then the proposed Brooking wind energy area consists of around 1,300 or 100,000 acres roughly, and is located approximately 18 miles from the shore. And then the proposed Coos Bay wind energy area consists of 61,000 acres, and it's located around 32 miles from the shore. And these areas have the potential to generate up to 3.1 gigawatts of power, which could power around 1.1 million homes. And then this whole effort more broadly is, in support of President Biden's goal to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 across the entire nation. So this is happening all over, but this is just Oregon's piece of the pie.
It's on mute. Oh, I see.
Oh yeah, perfect. Yep, got yourself muted there. All right. Well, so Annie just shared about the different wind energy areas that are being proposed for leasing. One thing that we have been receiving a lot of questions about is timing of this process. So this timeline here is more bigger picture of the overall process. So we're here-ish in terms of right now we're at a moment where There's been areas identified for leasing. We'll talk more about some of those different, like right now there is a proposed sale notice that's available to make comments on, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But throughout this estimated 10-year process, there's still a variety of site assessment surveys, environmental technical reviews, before any construction and operations plans are finalized, and before that we see turbines off the Oregon coastlines. So we wanted to share that because we've been seeing in some media that, there's been some confusion on, are turbines coming now? No, there's still many different reviews on not just like on the federal level, but the state level, like we're going to talk about today, and as well as even down the road, local level involvement. Let's go to the next slide, please. And zooming in here, we borrowed this slide from the Oregon Coast Management Program, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. Right now in Oregon, there are 3 different comment periods that are happening. We'll share more specifics on the state's comment process, but just to share, between now and the end of this year, there's an environmental assessment review of the different leasing areas. There's also a proposed sale notice review, which is about the auction and different criteria for that. And we expect between now and by December for there to be an auction to happen for these different leasing areas. So this is in terms of different reviews and steps in the process. There are a variety of opportunities for coastal community members, as well as interested parties and tribal governments, to be engaging in these variety of processes to share comments and concerns if that's on the state level and federal level of how we would like these processes to go. I think next slide, and I'll pass it back over to Annie.
Great, thank you, Ashley. So right now, within the current scope of what's happening, BOEM is not proposing construction and operation of offshore wind at this stage. The agency is proposing to lease the wind energy areas and allow lessees to conduct site characterization and site assessment activities to prepare their construction and operation plans for the eventual development. So this is just, one phase. They've basically cut it up into different segments. And right now we're just looking at, the site characterization and assessment activities. And so site characterization activities to consider here, BOEM basically intends to authorize the biological, archaeological, geotechnical, and geophysical surveys of the ocean to occur in order to understand the continental seafloor within the wind energy areas. And so this will include scientific surveys like deploying ROVs, or remotely operated vehicles, to take videos and explore the seafloor. It'll include taking grab samples and sediment cores from the seafloor in discrete locations across the wind energy areas. And this is basically to assess the geologic composition of the continental shelf on the bottom of the ocean. And this will inform cable landings and moorings for the eventual turbines. And then lessees will also be able to deploy buoys and instruments to gather oceanographic and meteorological data. So this is all just, scientific surveys to better understand the wind energy areas. And the current proposed action does not include, as I said, the construction and development, but also cable assessment activities in state waters. So it really only just includes federal waters and the wind energy areas. Next slide, please. And this is just a reminder, if you have questions as we go, we're going to get more and more technical. So please feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and people can upvote other questions by liking them, and then we can answer them all at the end. Okay, so next we're going to talk about this current comment period, and which we call the federal consistency review. So we're going to talk about what it is, why it matters, all things federal consistency. So the one sentence summary on what federal consistency is, it's basically a state check on the actions of the federal government that could affect state resources and uses of the ocean. So this review is the first opportunity for the state of Oregon to weigh in on the actions related to potential offshore wind development that the federal government is proposing, and make sure that those actions are consistent with state policies. So that's sort of what we're talking about in a nutshell. But I'll pass it on to Eric oh wait, excuse me, this is me. Okay, so first, in order to understand kind of the role that the state plays and that the federal government plays in this complicated process, it's important to first understand who has jurisdiction over the ocean. So this diagram shows the grand scheme of ownership of the ocean and uses of the ocean. The state's jurisdiction over marine resources and uses of the ocean extends from the coastline at the low water mark to 3 nautical miles out to sea. So that's shown by this blue area right here. And then thereafter, from 3 nautical miles to 24 miles of the sea is under control of the federal government. And then the US also has exclusive rights to use marine resources out to 200 nautical miles. And beyond that's international waters. So offshore wind is being proposed in federal waters on the outer continental shelf. And I'll pass it to Eric now to dive a little bit deeper into federal consistency.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, so the whole base for federal consistency review comes from the Coastal Zone Management Act. That was a law that was passed in 1972, and it basically incentivizes all the coastal states to create coastal management programs to collaboratively oversee actions in the coastal zone. The federal consistency provision of that CZMA, like Annie kind of touched on, basically requires that any federal action that happens in the coastal zone that has a reasonably foreseeable effect on land or water or natural resources that the state would have jurisdiction over has to be consistent with the policies of the state. Without this provision, the state really wouldn't have a say in what the federal government does within its own jurisdiction. The big kind of difference between what this consistency review comment period offers versus the 2 other federal comment periods going on right now that were mentioned is that this, again, is where the state has a chance to weigh in. DLCD is not taking any action here. They are not, don't have any real role right now in the process for getting this wind development through. They are just looking at what the federal government is doing and deciding whether it lines up with Oregon's laws. So going further into that, Oregon's implementation for the Coastal Zone Management Act is called the Oregon Coastal Management Program. That is the program that, like I said, is responsible for administering this federal consistency review within Oregon, and that is housed within the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD. That program is a networked program of state, federal, and local governments that all have authority in the coastal zone. And it's a coordinating place for all of those different entities to collaboratively manage coastal resources. And essentially, what happens there is that DLCD, through the Coastal Management Program, has the authority to kind of decide what is going to be an enforceable policy for the federal government. And those are all kind of the state laws and regulations and local government land use regulations and comprehensive plans. DLCD will review those, submit them to BOEM, or to, sorry, not to BOEM, to NOAA, the National Ocean Atmospheric Administration, who will then approve them. So there is, when we're talking about enforceable policies, we are talking about a discrete list of things that have been approved through the Oregon Coastal Management Program. So kind of getting into the process of what this federal consistency review is going to be like. This is a timeline of it. BOEM, as the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, is as a federal agency responsible acting here, has already released a consistency determination where they say effectively they think that this lease is consistent with Oregon's enforceable policies and justify that. Now that kind of started a 60-day clock for the Oregon Coastal Management Program through DLCD to review that and decide whether they agree or not. Within that 60-day period is where we are now, which is the 30-day public comment period. And that is the public comment period that ends on Saturday. After we all submit those public comments, DLCD is going to take a look at them and take a look at what BOEM said in their consistency determination and make a decision about whether or not it agrees effectively. The outcome of DLCD's decision can be one of three things. Either DLCD can concur, where they basically say they agree with BOEM, they think this action is consistent with Oregon's enforceable policies. They can concur with conditions, which again, they agree. They say for the most part this is consistent with Oregon's enforceable policies, but here are some specific conditions that you need to follow in order to make sure that that's actually true. Finally, they can object, which is what it sounds like. They can disagree that the action is consistent with Oregon's enforceable policies, either for substantive reasons or because they just don't have enough information to decide whether or not it's enforceable. BOEM hasn't given them enough information to decide. And that, can look like an objection detailing the specifics that they think is wrong, and then BOEM would have to come back for a later consistency review to try to meet those issues. So I've been saying the term enforceable policies a lot and haven't given a great explanation for that. But like I said earlier, those are the specific state laws and regulations that are implemented into the Oregon Coastal Management Program. This is a list of a lot of the ones that are the most relevant here. There is, also lists on DLCD's website that are much more extensive, and BOEM details the enforceable policies that they think are applicable here in their consistency determination. But I know that looking at this, a lot of it can seem overwhelming, and there's a lot of stuff to consider. But Oregon has some really strong enforceable policies that you really just need to know the basics to be able to point to what you think is going on here. For example, one on here is statewide land use goal 19. It's a really great example of one of Oregon's strong enforceable policies, which says, all actions in the coastal zone shall be developed and conducted to conserve marine resources and ecological functions for the purpose of providing long-term ecological, economic, and social values and benefits. That's a really broad enforceable policy that really, BOEM's action here has to do a lot to make sure it is consistent with that pretty big goal. And I will pass it back to Annie now.
Great, thank you, Eric. So again, BOEM has chosen to limit the scope of their environmental assessment and their federal consistency review to site characterization and assessment activities that'll be conducted by leasees. They're also asking for permission to, actually lease the ocean. And they're also looking at cable corridor assessments that will be needed to determine where cables will be located. But all of this is happening within federal waters. They've chosen to leave the surveys in state waters out of this process, even though we know that geotechnical and geophysical surveys will eventually have to be conducted to determine where the cables will go. So this is an interesting way that they've kind of pieced it apart. So the review, the scope right now, will only be assessing how survey impacts in federal waters could influence marine resources and communities of the state, and not construction and operation or impacts to estuaries and shoreland resources. And unfortunately, this leaves a lot of important enforceable policies off the table for this specific federal consistency review. Um, and that's just for now. There's going to be another federal consistency review closer to the construction operation phase and after these surveys are conducted. But I will say it's important to um, point out effects that are relevant to other areas in state waters, to help the state prepare for future federal consistency reviews. So if anyone has concerns about impacts to, their visual resources, to the estuaries and port development, it's not directly within the scope, but it's still relevant to bring up to the state because it'll guide their future review, and also give the state a better idea of, what it is that the public cares about. Next slide, please. So what makes this comment opportunity particularly important? Well, the state has the authority to influence the trajectory of BOEM's process. The state is more responsive of public concerns than BOEM is. And they're much more likely to incorporate a lot of the feedback that they get from the public, because they are, a state body. We also have more protective environmental policies in Oregon than the federal government does, when it comes to managing our marine resources. And so it's really important that our state laws can then be applied to mitigate damage to the environment at this stage. And then importantly, the state can also set lease conditions that leasees and BOEM have to follow for environmental compliance. And then the last thing is that, the state is using this public comment opportunity to plan future needs for federal consistency review and prepare for construction operation, like I said. So it's still important to kind of let the state know what concerns might happen down the road or be relevant down the road. All right. And then I'm going to pass it off to Ashley to talk about talking points.
Yes. Thank you, Annie. We'll also be sharing in the chat our robust comment guide that our three organizations have collaborated on. So let's go to the next slide here. Back one. There we go. There we go. Woo. Well, one of the things that we really want to encourage folks is to encourage stronger community and tribal engagement. There's a statewide planning goal number 1, which is all about public engagement. And, I know DLCD's been doing some efforts this last week, like meeting directly with coastal communities, but this is really one of the first steps in Oregon's process of navigating offshore wind. So want to give them kudos for doing those meetings last week, and to also encourage for them to continue those efforts on, as well as the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, just for stronger, more community engagement as we go through the next steps of the process. Also, respect tribal sovereignty and commit to meaningful engagement. Tribes are sovereign nations and must be treated as such in evaluating and determining the potential areas for offshore wind development. And we mean like not just like having a meeting and checking it off the box, checking off the box on the list of things for the for our state and federal agencies to do, but to do more meaningful commitments and really engage more meaningfully as government to government relationships. And also recognizing that we also want to have folks uplift that there are a number of tribes that are left out of this process currently, because there are tribes that that call especially the areas for potential leasing as their ancestral homelands, but may not be federally recognized. And so a lot of our tribal consultation requirements on state and federal levels are mostly around engaging with federally recognized tribes. And we just want to note that there are tribes that are being left out of conversation spaces and need to be brought into this process. Next slide, please. And then also another priority is ensure that local priorities are met. Sorry for the small text there. And so this is in relation to BOEM's proposed sale notice and statewide planning goal 1. And so part of this auction, or part of this process that's happening with BOEM right now, there is a proposed sale notice that has some criteria around what's called community benefit bid credits and workforce development credits. And these are opportunities for different groups and community members to engage with developers in terms of trying to help create like terms and conditions for developers to follow in the offshore wind process. One thing that multiple folks have noted that's a real deep need for South Coast communities. Right now, the bid credits for workforce development are 15%, and for general communities that are impacted by the potential lease areas is 5%. And I know folks like myself that are living on the South Coast and know about the housing issues here, that looking encouragement in terms of increasing those bid credits to help meet the needs for sustainable housing development on the South Coast. And then also looking for helping clarify the process for developing community benefits agreements to make it more accessible to impacted communities, and ask for more clarification who BOEM and developers can enter community benefit agreements with. One thing that's been noted by our conservation partners is that there are, especially since there's a lot of unknowns at this time, folks are looking to encourage conservation bid credit, which would require lessees to provide plans for adaptive management strategies that may shift based on their monitoring outcomes. And actions must be taken to reduce future impacts on wildlife and the ocean ecosystem. Before moving to the next slide, I just wanted to note in the chat, I forgot to mention, we shared CT Clusi's offshore wind press release from earlier this year. Just want to note that a lot of time, we want to encourage folks, if folks do want to uplift tribal concerns, to use tribal government's words. And so looking at sources such as this press release is one of those resources to use in terms of uplifting the words from tribal governments. Thank you. And I'll pass it back over to Annie.
Great, thanks. Okay, so another key thing or key consideration that folks could comment on, Oregon statewide planning goal 19, which governs ocean resources, is pretty clear that protecting living marine resources should be prioritized above non-living resources. So it's really paramount to ask the state to prioritize our marine resources, wildlife, and habitats in this process. And you can use Goal 19 to justify that, as well as this ORS code that's listed on the screen, which discusses wildlife policies for the state. And importantly, the state could use Goal 19 to justify a condition for BOEM to conduct a more comprehensive environmental review and cumulative impacts assessment of the entire offshore wind process, rather than piecemealing their reviews as they've done so far. We really want to see a more holistic and robust analysis of the impacts on the whole coastal ecosystem from all the collective phases of offshore wind development, from the leasing to construction and development to eventual decommissioning. Given how important and interconnected the California current ecosystem is, and how important it is for fisheries and our livelihoods. So we also got some ideas from California's federal consistency determination. They required several mitigation conditions to basically require lessees to mitigate impacts to wildlife when they're conducting their surveys. And so the state could also require similar mitigation measures to reduce the likelihood of entanglement and vessel strikes, that could really impact sensitive marine wildlife, but importantly, like endangered species, whales such as the southern resident orca, that was just listed under Oregon's Oregon's endangered status. So that's just another idea when it comes to commenting, is to really lay out for the state like what kind of conditions you want to see attached to the lease to mitigate harm to the environment. Next slide, please. Our outer continental shelf is also home to some really sensitive and rare ocean habitats, which support fish and wildlife. So another important ask is for the state to require mitigation measures that protect these habitats during anchoring and geotechnical surveys, as I discussed earlier, that basically, collect samples from the sediment and core, deep into the sediment to, determine the geological composition of the continental shelf. And so, some of these conditions could be requiring protective best management practices and equipment that is, less destructive to benthic habitats. It could also require lessees to avoid contact altogether where there is known habitat like seamounts, deep sea corals, sponges, or require some kind of buffer around these areas to reduce the impacts. Another idea is to encourage lessees to collaborate on their survey efforts so that it reduces the sheer, frequency and number of bottom disturbances that occur across the wind energy areas and in federal waters. And these are all just ideas, but you can suggest other conditions for the state to consider. And again, Goal 19 is a really strong resource that backs up these kinds of mitigation requirements to protect marine resources.
I'll pick up over here. One thing that that folks can also really encourage on during this process is to update enforceable policies to prepare for the road ahead. So one thing that makes this a pretty interesting comment opportunity is that it technically, when a federal consistency review brings together coordinating agencies on the state, local and federal level. So though at this time, like local policies don't apply to this scope, we can encourage the state to think about other comprehensive plans that are needed to evaluate proposals that include like port development or transmission line upgrades, a lot of those different like shoreline concerns. So right now during this time, you know, that those may not be applicable to like this current state process. But again, this is the state's first real opportunity in being engaging and taking comments at the scale around offshore wind. So folks can help set the stage on what are different priorities, as well as different topics and areas for folks to look onto. So one that we like to bring up because it's local, since our three organizations have last year we're working on the Coos Bay Estuary Management Plan. So for instance, that's a really key local guiding tool in the Coos Bay area for development in the estuary and shoreline areas. So a comprehensive phase 2 update still needed, and policies really need to be set forth, and really thinking about the planning and around potential port development that may be proposed in association with offshore wind, and thinking about the different transmission lines criteria. Again, there's going to be needs and opportunities for updates down the road. So since that process of making those decisions are many years out, this is a great opportunity for folks to really kind of help foreshadow some of those different needs to come here. So let's go to the next slide, please. And then also some just generally some other South Coast needs that may not necessarily have a have an enforceable policy tied attached to them. So one is ensuring like energy resilience for coastal communities, ensuring energy affordability, and a lot of our different considerations for protecting the Oregon coast from climate impacts without replicating the harms of the fossil fuel industry. Also on this slide here, just uplifting, we have a quote from C.T. Clusie. And those are, again, just like when we think about the South Coast, generally, you know, these comments are a great opportunity to uplift tribal government comments. I know many of us supporting fisheries, so any fishery comments. And anyway, just thinking about, I know earlier we were trying to share like these enforceable policies for this specific process. But again, since this is the state of Oregon's first opportunity to take comments from the public in this regard, it's a great opportunity just to share as much of what's important to you as possible. Next slide, please. All right, I'm gonna just review before passing off to Kelly about how to make a comment. So this email here, coastpermits@dlcd, is one way how you can submit a comment. There is also a portal that we'll share in the chat too, that folks can go directly to send their comments. It's due this Saturday, June 15th. You don't have to wait until Saturday to turn in your comment. Just know that. Encourage folks to get those comments in throughout this week. When starting off your comment, you do want to focus on the federal action being reviewed at that time. tying it to those enforceable policies whenever possible. And we'll have an example here in just a moment. And also this is an opportunity, like when Eric was reviewing the different outcomes that can come from this process. So we can share, folks can suggest conditions in DLCD's ruling of this comment period that might mitigate negative effects or also benefit coastal communities. So this is an opportunity if folks want to see either like more of those different community priorities enhanced or certain environmental protections enhanced. This is a great opportunity to say, well, if you're going to give this thumbs up, only give it the thumbs up if you set these rules ahead. And so for this current stage of the process, I don't know if we did share a bit more earlier. Again, this is a comment period that out of the 3 that are happening right now, because the other 2 are with BOEM. This is one of the great opportunities for the state to really be a champion for coastal communities. And so this is out of the 3. If you were to ask me what to make a comment on out of the 3, this is the comment period I would suggest people to prioritize engaging with. If you want to go for all 3, you go for it. We're not going to hold you back. If you love to write comments, go for it. I know some of you are just so excited about comment writing here. But this is one of the, during this time when there is a lot happening, this is the one that we consider as a great opportunity to really help set the stage for the state and to really help set the stage for more coastal priorities to be enhanced during this time. So I'll pass it over to Kelly for the next slides there.
Thanks, Ashley. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to walk through sort of this framework that we use to help tie the enforceable policies to what we're asking for, or what our request is. And this is just a helpful 4-step process. We call it IRAC as lawyers, but basically you just lay out the issue, which is what is the problem. And then the rule is just the applicable policy or law. So that could be Goal 19 or one of the state statutes that Eric had mentioned earlier. The analysis is kind of when you're like explaining what the policy does and how that kind of connects to your request. And then in the conclusion, you're just going to restate what you're asking for. So next slide. And this is just an example that I came up with for Goal 19. So for the issue, I was just looking at the vessel traffic, which is expected to increase during site assessment, and that can potentially increase the risk of vessel collisions with sea turtles and whales. The rule I chose was Goal 19, and it just says that you're supposed to protect marine organisms and ecosystems. And then in my analysis, I just talked about how site assessment is going to increase the vessel traffic. And they found that vessel speed restrictions of less than 10 knots can sort of reduce those vessel strikes to migrating species. And since Goal 19 emphasizes conservation of marine resources, the Department of Land Conservation Development should include a condition that restricts vessel speeds. And then for my conclusion, I just kind of restate that like site assessment is going to increase vessel traffic, so DLCD should include a condition that restricts vessel speeds to less than 10 knots. And this is just one example, but there's like so many different conditions that everyone has talked about that you can put into this framework. And I guess I'll pass it to Ashley.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. That's the pro way of writing comments there, making different concerns that you have connected to those policies. Also just some like other general comment writing tips is share your story. Like really, like that could be what do you love about the coast? What's your personal or professional background? Like even like why are you even like writing a comment letter? And I think these are really great opportunities to, you know, if you have a background in fishing, if that's commercial or recreational. I know people in the past have spent time, you know, if you don't live directly on the coast, have had their own marine biology adventures out here. Or even writing your connection to the different cultural values and points of significance of these areas. So so it's really, if you got a passionate heart, this is an opportunity to share that. And I hope that through the different you know, priorities and enforceable policies that we've been sharing, that folks can find a way to like weave those together. We also want to encourage folks in their comments that to be productive, provide solutions, and help give guidance to the state. And I put in parentheses, state of Oregon's not Bowen. So I say that because really the way how this process has gone to this point, BOEM's been the leading agency. Yes, in many regards, the state's been involved in different meetings and engagement points, but it's been ultimately BOEM that's been making the decisions on the different leasing areas. So if folks have solutions that they want to share, you know, help provide that to the state. And I say that they're not BOEM because I went to a couple of the different DLCD meetings last week that were held out in different coastal communities. And anyway, yeah, it's yeah, the different leasing areas have not been up to DLCD at this point, but the state can engage into based upon the different comments and findings about how the next steps of the process should be prioritized and going. And I also want to encourage folks too that there are a number of unknowns, and if folks have questions, share them. They may have answers for them, but also they might have the same questions too. This is going to be an important process because after this point, as the process, if the proposed process is to move forward, that means different state agencies are going to be more involved. If that's, you know, Department of Energy, especially taking a look at transmission lines, Department of Environmental Quality, if it's through thinking about water quality, and then even thinking about Department of State lands for any dredging components too. So this is an opportunity to help share those answers, because since this is a coordinating agency time, a lot of those agencies will be engaged, especially in the future processes. So yeah. I was trying to see if I was missing anything there. Actually, let's move on to the next slide, which I think at this time is that we have yeah, oh my gosh, time is flying by. We're at question and answers time. So if folks do have questions, if it's about the earlier components of the presentation or even what we were just sharing about, please go ahead and put those in the chat here. I don't know if Jess and Abby on your end, if you folks have been getting any questions directly here.
Yeah, I will kick us off. We had a question in the chat asking, is there a way to submit a public comment with people signed onto it? They know a number of people who would agree with what they say, but they don't want to, but those people might not want to write an individual comment.
I guess I'll tackle that. Yes, I don't see why not. We in the coalition, NGO coalition space like to call them sign-on letters. So what you could do if you want to take on that approach is write your letter, send it to all of your friends and colleagues that would support and ask if they would want to sign on, and give feedback on the letter or whatever. And you can sign on their name at the very bottom, and state in your letter, like, we're writing this letter on behalf of all of these people, listed at the bottom. And just make sure you get permission, obviously, from those people to sign on their name. And then you submit the letter as a PDF or a Word doc. You send it to the email that we put in the chat. And that would be a good way to do that.
All right, and then I have another question. This was from earlier in the program, and this might be geared more towards the lawyers, but someone asked, did coastal energy or fuel security ever come up as a coastal priority? I think this is in regards to enforceable policies.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I saw the answer in the chat that has come up, and that's something that Rogue Climate especially has been putting a lot of time on and effort thinking into. In terms of enforceable policies for it, I am not aware of any enforceable policies that are targeted directly at it. I think that, you know, because of the kind of dynamic I described, where enforceable policies are not all of state law, they're just specific policies that the Oregon Coastal Management Program chooses to include and get approved by the federal government. Most of those policies are the ones that are directed directly at protecting ocean resources. So some of those broader statewide ones get left out. Like, I know that statewide land use goal 11 does have some stuff about making sure that there's adequate services provided to folks. But again, I don't think that's incorporated as an enforceable policy for this context. That being said, like we talked about, that's a great spot to frame for DLCD in your comments, that maybe you think that should be included as an enforceable policy before we get to the next phase with construction and operation permits.
If I may add something to that as well, I think it's also important to let the state know, you know, if there's something that they should be considering down the road when it comes to like who is getting access to the energy. Is the energy actually benefiting coastal communities if offshore wind is developed, or is it going to be going to California? For example, there's a lot of questions about who's actually, you know, gaining something from the energy that might be developed. So that's another thing that you could bring up to make sure that DLCD is aware that, you know, that could be a priority for folks to make sure that energy directly benefits Oregonians if we're going to develop our ocean.
Great. And then there was another question asking about entanglement. They're wondering if eco-lease provisions might provide funding to remove derelict fishing gear or reduce fishing gear losses.
I don't know if there's like an enforceable policy that could be applied to make that happen, but I don't see why somebody couldn't suggest that as a condition. Like if lessees are out on the water conducting surveys and have the capacity to, you know, bring up any derelict fishing gear that they find, potentially that's a condition that could be added to a lease. I don't know enough about that to, you know, speak intelligently about, you know, the mechanics of that and what that would look like, but I don't see why that couldn't be suggested as a potential condition. Does anybody have anything else to add to that? That's a really interesting question.
I don't have anything to add to it other than to say I think it's right, and like I think that the same enforceable policies we've talked about generally, like statewide land use goal 19, that are really set this strong goal of protecting those marine life resources, can justify that. There's also, and this is in the comment guide that was shared, but there's also some specific policies for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife that give them some power to like ask for mitigation going like above and beyond even just a specific action at issue. So it could be framed in terms of that too.
Great. All right, we have another question that asks, was there a separate due date for business or government comments?
From my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but to my understanding, everybody has the due date of this Saturday, June 15th, before midnight, I believe. So just try to get those in beforehand. I'll just say for previous experiences, try to do it before the 11:59 moment. Because that's when the computer tends to crash when I've done that before in the past. But definitely want to make sure that folks are able to make a comment. So I know for us hosting this workshop here tonight, that's one of the goals of hosting us is we'll see how many more questions there are, and feel free to ask questions away. And then with whatever time that is remaining, if folks are down to just stick around, we can actually start to crank out comments or even work on outlines and have some help and resources here from our awesome partners that are here tonight. But yeah, I was pretty sure that everybody has the same deadline here.
We have another question in the chat asking about the same question above about the energy. They didn't see any cultural layers, tribal, natural resource, or fishing layers being used in the modeling or location of development. Was this involved in spatial planning at all?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in that some data like spatial layers regarding cultural resources, fishing grounds, marine traffic ways and et cetera, and excuse me, marine mammal migratory corridors and stuff, like all of that was used to inform the wind energy areas as they stand right now. But when it comes to like where the energy is going, that hasn't been fleshed out at all. There's a lot of unknowns, and BOEM didn't even put forward like a potential pathway for cable landings to help us understand where they might be going with, where the cables are going to land, and where the energy is going to be, connected to the grid. There's a lot of questions that need to be figured out in terms of who's going to benefit from the energy, where is it going to go, how. There's a lot of grid questions that the state is going to figure out. That's not necessarily within BOEM's process, because they're the federal agency dealing with the federal waters, and then the state has to figure out all of the back end, like transmission routes and everything. So yeah, I mean, all of those layers are going to be super important in that process, and I think that's a really good comment to make to DLCD, to say, these are things that need to be considered when it comes to the transmission phase. We want to make sure that tribal natural resources and cultural resources are considered in the transmission route. But if anyone has anything else to add, please feel free to chime in.
I think just to chime in that there's just recently was announced, oh my gosh, my brain's going blank, but a consortium of different universities that are doing research on the many different components of offshore wind is starting between universities from Washington, Oregon, and California. And there's been some preliminary work and studies on transmission lines. So I think there's a lot of questions that around that are being researched right now in terms of taking a look at the when we take a look at the landscape of the current infrastructure that exists and taking a look to see like where these different um leases are happening. And I know California is already ahead of us in terms they've already gone through their leasing process and are on to the next steps after that. So I think we're in this like preliminary time where folks are just starting to do more deeper studies around that. So I know that there's already been some work done in the past, but it'll be interesting to see how things move forward because different states are, our West Coast states do have a number of goals for energy development, and so how do we make the systems that support that development efficient. So so more to come on that, on those specifics there. Yeah, I was gonna see do we have any more questions there or
I just
anything?
wanted to add really quick in on that. I just pulled up again the map of the wind energy areas. And while this is the first engagement opportunity that the state is participating in, there were a number of processes that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management led in order to narrow down these areas. So the outline of this was like the first initial call areas, they called it, and then that was winnowed down to this darker area based on a variety of different data layers. And the Oro wind map is another really good resource that we can link in the chat where you can see various data layers that have contributed to the more defined wind energy areas. And again, these are where there could be leases potentially by the end of this year, but it doesn't mean that there would be turbines covering this entire area. Developers would then take a look at this and from this next scoping period would determine where that would go. So there's definitely still opportunities to highlight those really important layers of data and traditional ecological knowledge as well in order to inform that element too. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, and we do have another question. It asks, could ports require offshore wind companies to share transmission lines and possibly offshore stations to reduce environmental impacts?
I'm gonna chime in and say I don't think that ports could require that necessarily, but the state could, and I'm not sure. I mean, somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure what state agency would be responsible for that. But yeah, I think that's a great point and a great opportunity that Oregon could look to. Eric, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'm also not sure the state agency with specific regulatory authority there, but I also think that that's, like Annie, I think mentioned earlier, like one talking point here is that BOEM should really be encouraging these companies to like combine assets on their site assessment for the same reason of like they should not be doing duplicative stuff, and for the kind of same reason they shouldn't be having duplicative transmission lines. And I think that that is something that can be raised to DLCD in this comment period, especially because, if that's going to happen, this is the stage where they're going to start planning, and they should be alerted to be planning to minimize those transmission lines.
That's a great question and a great idea. 。
I love those Zoom silences. Just wanted to know if, of course, if like folks have, again, if you have questions, this is the time to ask them. If there's any more, we'd love to address them, especially even just thinking, yeah, about this federal consistency review comment period. Really do appreciate folks being here tonight to review this with us. Yeah, just want to see if there's any other questions. Wow. Well, if there are no other questions at this time, I think we're at a moment where maybe we could take a few minute break here. So gonna have facilitation transparency moment where we're ahead of the schedule because you folks have been so on top of your questions. So I don't know, facilitation team was thinking maybe taking a break between 6:55 and come back at 7 o'clock. That sounds good. When we return, that will be an opportunity. We're gonna get into small groups and do comment writing. And folks can and we'll try to pair up groups. We'll see how many folks we have here and pair up accordingly. So take a few minutes and we'll get rolling again at 7 o'clock here. So appreciate folks being here. Oh, and actually before that, I forgot. I just wanted to mention Sadie Carney is here from Department of Land Conservation and Development. So I was like, oh, I don't know if, yeah, I forgot to give you a shout out there, Sadie. So I know I just sent people off the break, but I was like, oh no, can't forget about Sadie.
Yeah, it's so bright in my office at this time of day. And I just want to say, for folks that don't know me, hi, Sadie Carney. I use she, her pronouns. And I work as a community engagement specialist at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So not at all your coastal expert, not here for that reason, but because these are such complex issues, and Rogue Climate was taking this opportunity to engage people and help guide people through the enforceable policies and how to submit a comment. I thought it might have value for me as a community engagement specialist and potentially for our program overall to think about ways that we could help demystify this and help make the process more accessible to people. And so just huge kudos. I was complimenting Ashley in the chat on making such an accessible kind of, process and slides and explanation. I was in attendance at a few of the community meetings last week, and this is a really nice approach. And I really do. I hope you will all comment on the process as we move ahead. This really relies upon, Oregonians sharing their feedback so that we can make the best decisions possible for the state and for our communities moving forward. But it takes all of us. And we don't want to do it alone. Quite honestly, we do want to hear from as many people as we can. So this is like the worst angle and worst time of day, like in combination to be talking to you all. So I apologize for that. But I may hop off. I may stick around. I don't want anybody to feel like DLCD is in their breakout room. And again, that's certainly not my intent in attending, but I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to say hi, Ashley. And thank you again all for the great work you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Sadie, so much for sharing and for being here. Yeah, I know we were talking into the break here. But folks are still we're at almost 7 o'clock, like doing like the seventh inning stretch here. Yeah, I know some folks do have to pop off at 7 too because Imagine that. There's another Zoom to go to, I bet. When do Zooms not happen? That's the question. What time are they? Anyway. Yeah, really encourage folks to yeah, if you need to get another beverage or a snack. I know we're during dinner hour here. Just really appreciate folks being here. We're adjusting it to 7:02 since we had the introductions with Sadie. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, hello people. How did everybody have an enjoyable comment breakout group? I feel like comments are a mental workout, right? Well, I hope folks either get a good start to their outlines tonight or get something into DLCD. Reminder, you have until Saturday night, which, you know what, nothing sounds like a cozier Saturday night than writing a comment on offshore wind energy, but you can submit it earlier, just to let you folks know. You don't have to wait till your Saturday night to do it. So thanks, Jess, for bringing that up. So yeah, just as a reminder to submit that comment before Saturday, June 15th. There, I think also just wanted to give an update, and I know, oh, and Annie also, right? And comments don't have to be lengthy. Yeah, you don't have to write you don't have to write every word possible. You can, you can if you want to. I mean, go ahead. But for comments to be really effective, just really make your points clear, and especially early on. Oh, and I'm glad that the GIF was great for the kids. Love a good Kermit on a type. I'm like, also I forgot to mention, we've been pushing the online submission for comments. You can submit your comments through the mail too, especially if you got a typewriter and want to be like Kermit here and type up your letter and mail it to DLCD in Salem. You're more than welcome to. But yeah, Jess, let's jump ahead to that. I know we're coming up at 7:30 and definitely want to make sure that folks can get back to their dinners. I know that there's some kids waiting for some dessert. Just wanted to mention again, so this current the state process has a comment period due on Saturday. The day before that, if you feel like doing a environmental assessment comment, or that is due on Friday as well. There's also that another comment period with BOEM, the proposed sale notice. Both of those comment periods are available on the Oregon activities page, so if folks want to read more into that. We just didn't really go into those in depth today because we wanted to make sure that we talked about the state process here. So for what's coming ahead here, there's an auction that's estimated for later this year. A lot of that timeline is tied to some oil leasing requirements that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act. So basically, for Oregon, the deadline for this current time frame is through the end of this year. And if an auction doesn't happen before that, then it's kind of like it has to get repaired with another lease. We didn't go into this earlier, but just sharing with folks, one of the reasons why BOEM is pretty strict with this timeline right now is because for every renewable energy lease right now, it must be tied to a fossil fuel lease that has a 1-year timeline to get auctioned off. So that's part of that there. Another part that's happening is I know Sadie was sharing in our group that Department of Land Conservation and Development out of this year's legislative session, there was a bill that passed HB 4080 that gives funding for 2 full-time permanent positions at DLCD to focus on offshore wind. And part of that engagement is through helping develop a roadmap that will give basically a state like a framework and opportunities for deeper community engagement about how to navigate, especially those unknowns that people were naming here. And like, for instance, if there's like policies that need to be created because like we haven't had like offshore wind energy before in Oregon. So there's some opportunities coming with that. I know Road Climate and a number of other groups were able to participate in what was called a outline for a roadmap. So I'm just gonna share that here. So this is like definitely not everything that needs to be considered, but this is just like a starting place of how that process can go. And pretty much just want to wrap it up in terms of, you know, between now and this auction time, there may be more different comment periods, meetings, opportunities to share thoughts, feelings, priorities for this offshore wind process. And I'm just going to encourage, if you're not on any of our groups email lists, to sign up to get updates, or you're on the social media, you can find us on there too. I know Road Climate and Oregon Shores, we try to share out different comment opportunities and stuff. So yeah, if you're on the interwebs on your phones, you can find us there. Good old Facebook and Instagram, and I can't keep up with the rest of them. But oh, yep, Oregon Shores got a newsletter. And anyway, just basically want to encourage folks to keep open for other types of community engagement. So thanks, Jess, for sharing that. And then I guess next slide. And we appreciate you so much. I like that little GIF. You know, way to bring in the sea there. Yeah, stay in touch with us. There's Annie and I's emails, so folks want to reach out to us, especially this week for comment writing stuff. You're more than welcome to reach out to us. And just want to give a huge shout out, of course, to our presenters, Annie with Oregon Shores, Eric and Kelly with Crag Law Center, and for Jess and Abby for holding it down with the tech support. It really takes a team to run a Zoom event, especially on offshore wind. So appreciate you all being really respectful with us tonight. And again, if you want to write comments, we welcome you to write comments and let everybody know what's going on. So thank you all for being here. Oh, and Crag has a newsletter too. I forgot about that. Can't forget about. Oh, I love the Crag. Yeah. Well, of course, folks are more than welcome to stick on if folks need. You know, as we're trickling out here. Any other last questions? Feel free to let us know. Otherwise, happy comment writing, right? I know I'm fired up to write a comment. Yeah, I think we could probably stop the recording too.
We can also follow up via email with a lot of the resources that we dropped in the chat, so you can have it all in one place. The comment guide's a great resource to get you started.
Yes, yes. Well, there will be a follow-up email. So thank you, Annie, for mentioning that.